This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
This is Military Matters. Two things that instinctively feel bad to mix are politics and health. As of this recording, the midterm elections are over, and for that reason, I'm more comfortable releasing this episode because one thing about this show that I don't want to do is try to convince you that any particular political party has the right idea about anything. What we strive to do is present stories from the world of our military, offering up experts and analysts, as well as our own 2 cents, in order for you to stay informed or to make up your own mind and opinion. In this episode, we're going to be talking about women's reproductive health. This is without doubt one of the most contested issues in politics today. But it's also a topic that affects women service members. Women make up about 27% of the military, roughly 567,000 women service members. There are more than 1 million military spouses, and 91% of them are women. Before we get too far into this story, I think it's fair to point out the obvious, and that it's an episode about women's reproductive rights in the military told to you by a guy, me. The goal here was not to mansplain this issue to you. Mansplaining, in case you're not familiar with the term, is when a man explains to someone, typically a woman, in a manner regarded as condescending or patronizing. Now, I try not to do that in general, so I don't think it was that hard not to be a jerk in presenting the story. The other issue that I had to consider is that most of the laws, legislation, and science regarding women's reproductive health is written, voted on, and presented by more guys. So with all that said, I'm embracing the fact that this story is being told by the women I've interviewed and through my lens to you, the listener. And finally, if you haven't already picked up on my use of the words woman and women service member, that's what I'm going with. I could have gone with female service member the same way that I could say male service member and not man service member. My episode, my choice. I'm going with woman service member for no other reason than I think it sounds better. So, this story really begins with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, the 1973 landmark ruling that established the constitutional right to abortion in the U.S. The U.S. Supreme Court repealed the ruling in a 5-4 decision this year. This opened the door for states to make abortions illegal. But in the military, there was already an issue with women's access to abortion procedures.
Since the Hyde Amendment, so-called Hyde Amendment, the federal government has been prohibited from paying for abortions.
That's Stripes reporter Nancy Montgomery. Her story, Military Women Say DoD Reproductive Health Care Far From Seamless in Post-Roe Era, really laid the foundation for this episode. Nancy's referring to the 1977 Hyde Amendment, named after Congressman Henry J. Hyde, which initially banned Medicaid funds from being used for abortions, except for when the life of the mother was in danger. Medicaid, by the way, is government health insurance for qualifying low-income adults, children, pregnant women, elderly adults, and people with disabilities. So the Hyde Act pretty much shut the door on abortion access to low-income women on Medicaid. They'd have to pay for it out of pocket or find an alternative. Over the years, the Hyde Act would undergo several changes and would eventually come to bar military hospitals from performing abortions except in cases of rape or incest or if the mother's life is in danger.
Contraception fails, even if you are diligent. Sometimes it fails. And women get pregnant.
Let's take a moment and talk about why abortions happen. It seems like whenever we talk about abortions, there's a quiet and sometimes not so quiet accusation of irresponsible behavior on the part of the woman. I've heard some folks from the anti-abortion side make the argument that abortion is treated by some women like birth control. But studies like the one from the Guttmacher Institute showed that 74% of the women studied cited that having a child would interfere with their education, work, or care for dependents. 73% said they couldn't afford a baby at the moment, and 48% said that they simply didn't want to be single mothers or were having relationship issues. All of these things can compound on top of each other, so it's not mutually exclusive reasons. The point, as Nancy said, is that pregnancy does happen and can happen regardless of contraception. Do some women use abortions as a form of birth control? Sure. But that number is statistically minute. They're outliers. In fact, most women who have abortions have never had one before. If most women used abortions as birth control, the average woman would have had 30 abortions in their lifetime. So no, that narrative doesn't really fit. This is important because as we go forward in the story, the idea that an abortion is the result of bad choices doesn't really work. There are lots of reasons women choose to explore having an abortion. This doesn't play into whether an abortion is right or wrong either. You may have religious reservations, personal ones, whatever. Your moral yardstick is yours and yours alone. But there are simply reasons women consider this approach beyond irresponsible behavior. I asked Nancy how she felt when she heard the news of Roe versus Wade being overturned.
Well, I was horrified. I mean, I believe it was wrongly decided. There's already been all kinds of, problems for women who've had miscarriages or who have ectopic pregnancies. Doctors have to wait till the ethics committee in the hospital say, okay, you can do it. Women and men who have, say, lupus, some of the same medications for medication abortion where you take 2 pills are also used for other diseases. And some pharmacists won't prescribe those anymore to women because they might get pregnant. And it's just it's rippling throughout healthcare where it's sort of pitting patients against their doctors. How much do they tell their doctors? Can they trust their doctors? Can they trust the other medical people? It's having a deleterious effect in so many ways. And it's chaos out there now. Like there'll be a state like Michigan, for instance, that had a trigger law waiting to go. But then a court said, no, you can't do it yet for whatever reason. And then another court said, yes, it can go into effect. And then another court said, no, it can't. So, I mean, it's stop, go. I mean, it's just, which, some people think was part of the plan.
In Louisiana, a pharmacist refused to fill a prescription for Cyotec, even after they called the doctor and were told the medication was for IUD insertion. Because Cyotec, also known as misoprostol, I'm probably messing that up, is the second part of a 2-part drug cocktail for abortions, the pharmacist still refused to provide the prescription despite the doctor's explanation and prescription. This isn't necessarily about the pharmacist and his politics. It's about the pharmacy not wanting to be sued or breaking the law as being complicit in helping someone with an abortion. This was such an issue after the Roe versus Wade repeal that after numerous complaints from across the country, in July of this year, federal health officials reminded pharmacies that they must comply with federal civil rights laws in the supplying and dispensing of medications. They can't discriminate in dispensing medications based on gender or the patient's status of pregnancy. I asked Nancy, as a woman and journalist covering the story, how she felt as she wrote about the DoD and its abortion policies.
Yeah, I've been, a pro-choice believer since I was a young woman. There's nothing that's ever changed my mind. And I know that women don't take it lightly when they decide what they're going to do when they get pregnant and they can't handle it for whatever reasons. I trust women. But what I didn't know was when I did this story was just how devastating it is. Because these were women, military associated women, who had a very wanted pregnancy and things went wrong. They got these tests back where The fetuses were very damaged, genetic problems. One fetus had like no skull and its brain was unprotected. And, it was going to die either in utero or as soon as it was born. And so to these women who, they're sort of just like, well, the baby's going to die. I wonder if it's going to die tonight. Or, they go through the most terrible of emotions because, they're bonded with this. They think of it as their babies. And they are also like second trimester abortions often. It's just really, really tragic. And to have them not be able to have the choice, to have them have to carry that baby, that fetus, knowing it's going to die at some point, it's beyond cruel to me.
There are different reasons a woman may look to abortion as a real alternative. A woman's service member's options are already limited by the Hyde Act, so TRICARE and military hospitals are off the table. But with the repeal of Roe v. Wade, certain states are now making abortions illegal. Currently, 11 states have banned abortions. The Washington Post reported that nearly 1 in 3 women ages 15 to 44 live in states where abortion is banned or mostly banned. So what does that mean for a women's service member? It means that she could be stationed in a state where abortions are banned. They'd have to take personal leave, potentially cross several states and find a doctor to have the procedure done. This issue is compounded when that service member is stationed overseas. Now they have to take leave, fly back to the States, find a state and the doctor, then have the procedure done. The Hyde Act only allows military hospitals to perform an abortion in the case of rape or incest or if the service member's life is endangered from the pregnancy. But there are situations when their life is not in danger, but they want an abortion, not because they don't want to be a parent, but because there are complications or issues with the fetus. When we return from the break, I talk with the woman service member and military spouse who is exactly in that situation. Should you be forced to carry a fetus if that fetus has suffered catastrophic birth defects? Should the choice be yours? When we come back. If you're looking to make a career change or still trying to find your path outside the military, I recommend checking out Sabio, the coding bootcamp and developer community that's helped so many veterans become successful software engineers. Sabio teaches you the skills to start a real high-paying tech job in just 17 weeks, online and from the comfort of your own home. Visit sabio.la/military to learn how you can use your VA benefits to enroll. That's sabio.la/military.
So I remember I was doing something for work. I was on, my laptop and I saw a post come through. I had a few tabs open and I was checking Facebook and I saw a post come through and someone had said, can't believe it, RV Wade overturned.
That's Bari Wald. She's an Air Force reservist and military spouse to an active duty Marine.
I immediately had this visceral reaction. It was almost as if my sympathetic nervous system just activated. My heart started pounding. I couldn't believe it. And so I go and, of course, it's breaking news all over the place. And I immediately turn on a news station and start watching and start, connecting with people. I'm on a few private forums for women who have had abortions for wanted pregnancies. And of course, it was just a flood of comments and emotions coming through.
In 2015, Bari and her husband had found out they were pregnant. It was her first pregnancy, and they were both happy and excited.
Everything was going great until it wasn't. Up until about week 17 or 18, when we found out there was a lot of issues with our son. And what ensued was just, a lot of invasive testing for confirmation, finally getting the news.
At the time of their pregnancy, the Walds were stationed in Okinawa, Japan.
And actually, when I found out something was wrong with him, my husband was gone. He was at an exercise in the Philippines. And I found out on a Friday afternoon when my phone kept ringing over and over and over. And you got to remember, or you got to know, I guess, that overseas, when you get a phone call from an on-base number, it usually shows up on your cell phone as no caller ID. And because of the job that I held over there, it was a pretty public facing job. I would get upwards of, 20 phone calls a day. So Friday evening, I'm probably not going to answer that call. Well, I actually did. And it turned out it was a nurse from the Naval Hospital, and she had been trying to get a hold of me for weeks. But because I don't know if their policy is not to leave messages, I had no idea that somebody from the Naval Hospital was calling me to tell me that my blood work had come back elevated in certain areas that could indicate something wrong. And man, I haven't cried about this in a long time. I'll never forget. She goes, "Can I pray with you?" Like, that's how she wanted to end the call. "Can I pray with you?" Which is very sweet, but it also indicates like, oh shit, something's really wrong. And after that, I text my husband. We still had communication. He was still able to get text from me. And then when he called me, I said, "Something's wrong with the baby." He calls me, and I couldn't even talk for obvious reasons. I was very upset. And finally was able to get out that something was wrong. And his command had him home within 24 hours. So from there, we had to go in for more invasive testing. And because we were in Okinawa and they had to send it to Hawaii to be tested, it took a few weeks to get the results. And in the interim, we're waiting for these results, and we're running through worst case scenarios, and we're doing a lot of research, and it didn't look good. Like, any way you looked at it, it was not going to be a good life for this child. Best case scenario for the child was still a pretty shitty existence. And so we had made the decision that if these tests come back positive for these abnormalities, then yes, we would terminate the pregnancy. And then they did.
Once again, we come to your personal moral yardstick. Whatever you consider catastrophic, a crappy existence, that's up to you. The Walds didn't take this decision lightly. They wanted this baby, and they considered the quality of life by their standards, which, as the mother and father, they have every right and obligation to consider. But when they went to their military provider with their decision, they were confronted with a new challenge.
So, since I did not meet the requirement of the law due to the Hyde Amendment, as I didn't meet the criteria of being raped, incest, or that my life was in danger, military medicine could not help me. It's against the law at that point. So we were told that there was a clinic that performs abortions. And also, at this point, I'm 19 weeks, 6 days, I think. I mean, I'm about to hit that 20-week threshold where at that time, a lot of abortion providers will not do an abortion at that point. So we had to get somewhere literally that day. And we were given, a name of a clinic that was not too far from the Naval Hospital, probably 10 minutes away, and left the Naval Hospital and went directly there.
The Walds received the name of the abortion clinic in Okinawa from the Navy Hospital's maternal fetal medicine doctor.
Yeah, we didn't find it on our own. Now, it wasn't her saying you should go here or anything like that. She was just giving us an option, due to the dire circumstances we were in. We're in Okinawa. There's like one flight out of day. Even if I wanted to get home to the States, I wouldn't make it home in time to meet this 20-week ban restriction in certain states. Like, there's just a lot of factors that go into something like this. So yeah, we left. We went directly to the clinic, and we're told that it will be $5,000, equivalent to $5,000, but in yen and cash only. So my husband had to leave me there while he drove back to base, went to Navy Fed, And at this time in our lives, we didn't have $5,000 sitting around. So he took out a cash advance from a credit card and then had to go to a different bank and exchange it for yen.
Bari's husband is running around bank to bank trying to get the cash for this procedure, going into debt, and the clock is ticking while Bari can only wait with the dread and sadness of her situation. But then things get worse.
I'm by myself in this clinic, and they end up taking me back prior to him coming back to start an examination, which was a pretty brutal, invasive examination. In the States, when you're having your like when you go to a gynecological exam or anything to do with your vagina, the doctor is going to use lube, right? And be gentle. This was not the case. It was very rough, very painful. And it was almost as if it was kind of their way of saying like, well, you chose to do this. That's the only thing I could think. Perhaps there's the cultural factor that women are still considered essentially second-class citizens over there. And when it comes to childbirth, their view is like, it should be painful. You did this. This is something you need to go through. They just have very different views on pain management in medicine.
I was curious about the office she was in. From the sound of her experience, I imagined some dimly lit room with flickering neon signs outside, but that wasn't the case at all.
It was a beautiful office. And there were a lot of other American women there when I showed up, because it was a well-known OBGYN in Okinawa who would do the 4D ultrasounds, which Naval Hospital doesn't do. And so it was, the cool thing to get. You go and you pay about $100 and you get this really cool 4D ultrasound of your baby. So there was probably a handful of American women there just to get an ultrasound done for fun.
So this wasn't an abortion clinic. This was a general purpose maternity clinic where women were coming in with healthy babies to get ultrasounds done. And Bari was there for something completely different. Imagine having to sit in that waiting room with all those smiling faces and happy pregnancies.
Yeah. When we pulled in, we had our windows down for some reason. And probably just because we were just, feeling so claustrophobic in the car, like couldn't believe everything was happening. But for some reason, our windows were down. And I remember this woman walking out crying on the phone to somebody. And she was like, oh my God, it's a boy. I wanted a girl. Like she had just found out, I guess, the sex of the baby, because people would go there for that as well if it didn't show up on their scan at the Naval Hospital. And she was upset because the sex of the baby wasn't what she wanted. And I just remember being like, I did not have good thoughts to think about her at that time, because all I wanted was my baby to be healthy.
So Bari's husband returns with the $5,000 in yen.
Yeah, so he gets the money, he comes back, pays. And at that point, they then put me in a room. And in Japan, it's not like a traditional room you would think of in a hospital here in America, where you have a bed and, it's very large. It's a small room, and it was a tatami mat, which is I believe it's bamboo. It's basically just like you're like on the floor, for lack of a better word, or better explanation. And that's when they started to start the process.
A mat on the floor. Now, I get it. It's Japan, culture and all. If I go to Japan for lunch and I have to sit on a mat, got it. But for a medical procedure?
I mean, it's typical of Japan. And we had been to restaurants where it's just tatami mat seating. You sit on the floor. So that piece wasn't as concerning as was the fact that the doctor didn't speak English, and his translator was maybe a 4 or 5 out of 10 on the English scale, and nobody else spoke English there. that was the concerning thing, because they couldn't adequately explain what was, the pills they were giving me, what was about to happen. It was like flying blind in an abortion, because they would just hand me pills in these little like clear envelope type things and say, take them. I didn't know what I was taking. And they put me on a Pitocin drip. And then that's not doing anything. So they said, we're going to try something. Well, they didn't say. They're like, okay, on to the next, right? Come into this room. And they tried to explain they were going to stick sticks in my cervix, which are laminaria sticks. And they're meant to dilate the cervix because they absorb water from your body and then they get bigger, and they're meant to dilate the cervix, which could help jumpstart labor. That's the whole purpose. Well, when they took me into this room to do it, I had to have 2 nurses hold me down, one on each side, like both legs open and down, and my husband on top of me holding me down, because they did it without any pain medication or numbing.
Let's pause here for a moment. They put laminaria sticks inside of this woman's cervix. Take a second and Google laminaria stick. It's exactly the opposite of what you'd want to put into your body. It's actually a kind of seaweed that's dried into a stick and used for dilating the cervix. These sticks have been known to actually rupture a cervix. So they do this procedure with 0 painkillers or numbing. They're holding her down on this mat that's on the floor while they insert these sticks into her cervix.
I mean, at that point I was like, well, this is the, point of no return. You're in it so deep, like, okay, I guess we'll just stick this out. We go back to my room, and they had to stay in overnight. So they had told us that he would be back in the morning at 9:00. And he did not come back at 9:00. He came back earlier. And since he came back earlier, my husband was actually gone. He had gone to get a cup of coffee. I'm not sure. He was still in the facility, but he left to get probably I think it was coffee and maybe something to eat. And they took me away without my husband being there. And what he remembers, and what he has told me, is he came back to hearing me, just bloody murder screaming. And what I remember, because then what was happening is they were pulling them out of me with no sedation or numbing. And what I remember is him busting through the doors and freaking out, like, what the, bad word is going on.
I asked Bari, with all of that having happened, at what point did the alarm go off in her head that this is all wrong, that she's in real danger here?
The alarm went off. I mean, truly, something's not right. It was about then, I had blood running down my legs. Come to find out later, they lacerated my cervix during that time. So at that point, because I guess I hadn't dilated enough, they put I think it's called a Foley bulb. They put this balloon in you and inflate it, and it sits on your cervix, and it's supposed to help it dilate more. It's basically full of, water or fluid. And it was when that was in and we're waiting for that we get my best friend on the phone. She was a nurse in Arizona, and she starts consulting with doctors she's working with, telling them like, hey, here's everything going on. And then the doctor came back and pulled the bulb out of me without deflating it, which is completely wrong. You're supposed to deflate it. That's not safe. And also he would come in when he would do checks, he would pull gloves out of his pocket and he would reek of cigarette smoke. It was almost like he just went out and smoked a cigarette, came in, didn't wash his hands, pulled these gloves out of his pocket. They're not sterile. And then check me.
Bari's nurse friend in Arizona is scared for Bari's life.
She's like, you need to get out of there. You need to get out of there. It's not safe. She also had found a Planned Parenthood in Arizona, for me and had booked an appointment. She's like, how soon can you get here? I can get you an appointment, in 3 days. And with the travel, so we started doing the calculations. Okay, if I get a flight out tomorrow, and then the travel time, I need to get there. So the day after that, in a perfect world, that would work. And we asked the clinic to call an ambulance, call the Naval Hospital and tell them we want an ambulance. Because at this point too, I'm throwing up. I mean, I'm not well. They come back and they say that the Naval Hospital said that they're not sending an ambulance. And so we were all on our own. And I will jump forward and caveat with what we found out happened later. It was they never talked to the Naval Hospital. They called the base translator, like the base operator, and it never got connected or patched over to the Naval Hospital. But at that time, we thought we were totally just alone. Like no one's coming to help. So my friend said, get out of there. And at this point, the time difference, right? It's around midnight, our time. And we go to leave and the doors are locked. So they have locked. It's not like a hospital where you can just walk out. The doors are always open. They locked us in. And my husband starts banging on the doors to wake somebody up. And the doctor comes out and tries to talk us into staying and would not listen. And then eventually, could see that my husband was probably going to break the doors if he didn't open them.
Locked in. So it sounds like no one was going to check on her bleeding, vomiting, lacerated cervix, nothing. She's writhing on the floor in agony. Bari's husband, a U.S. Marine who'd had enough of this insanity, might have just saved her life with that look devil dogs get when they're about to break stuff, which prompted the doctor to let them leave.
I know. It sounds like a horror story. Like we called it the torture cell, like the Japanese torture cell. So we get out, he eventually opens them and we get in the car and drive, 10 minutes home. And I'll just never forget, we rolled the windows down just to have that fresh air. And it was a really nice night out in May. And we drove home in silence and just had this relief of like, okay, we're safe now. We'll go home. We'll go to bed. We'll get up early because over there, you can't just go online and book your flight. You have to call the airport and talk to somebody. Well, you could book your flight if you can, read Japanese and do it on their website. But these are small airlines. It's not the big international airlines over there on the small island. So we as Americans, I don't speak Japanese. I don't read Japanese. I'd have to wait till they open to call and book my flight. Okay, so we'll just call first thing in the morning. We looked online. Okay, when do they open? We'll be up 5 minutes before that and then book the flight. But that didn't happen because I woke up and had 105-degree fever because I had gone septic from the botched abortion. I was like, we need to go to the ER right now. And he goes, this isn't happening. No, this isn't happening. This isn't happening. He was just like in disbelief that another thing had gone wrong. And, also it had been 2 days since we started this. So we hadn't slept. We had been through a lot. It was pretty rough. And so then we go to the Naval Hospital and they, triage me. And that's where they see, like, they knew what happened. We told them. Had to go to a clinic to have an abortion. And this is all the stuff that happened. And they confirmed, yep, you have a lacerated cervix and you're septic. So they immediately, started me on triple antibiotics and admitted me. And then now my life was in danger. So now I meet the criteria for them to complete an abortion. I checked the box. And they ran it up their chain, like legal, whoever at their higher headquarters, whoever had to check off on that. When it was finally checked off on, they said, oh yeah, obviously we can finish this procedure. And my maternal fetal medicine doctor, she was wonderful. And she came and gave me a huge hug. And I mean, I could tell she was just devastated that I had gone through all of this, only to end up back there. where now they have to finish the procedure by law because I meet the requirement.
This whole horrible fiasco happened 7 years ago, and the memory of losing her baby lives on, as does that nightmare of a botched abortion in a Japanese clinic. Few women, thankfully, have had to go through what Bari has gone through. I asked her, having gone through this ordeal, what the Hyde Amendment means to her now.
You know, the whole thing about the Hyde Amendment and not being able to use federal dollars to fund abortions, except for those three circumstances. That's the whole premise behind this, right? People don't want federal money to fund abortions. But what they're not seeing are the after effects and how much money has been spent on my healthcare due to this botched abortion that led to an emergency C-section, that then led to another C-section, that led to lots of mental health treatment. So, if people want to say, well, I don't want my money going toward that. Well, I promise you it's going to go toward it in some capacity when it comes to military and their families, because it's going to show up in different ways. Ultimately, I think for this issue, the solution lies with equality for healthcare for women. The fact that states can outright ban abortion, they can put a bounty on me for something I want to do to my own body. They can prohibit me from doing something to my own body, and that there's currently 109 installations affected by this. And if these other states follow suit, posed to be, I think it was 132 installations. So that's service members and their families that will be affected by this. So, ultimately, I would like to see a constitutional protection for my reproductive freedom.
Bari is not alone. There are women right now who are suffering with mental and physical realities of abortions gone right and wrong. An abortion isn't a decision taken lightly by women. It's not like getting a tooth extraction or some other typical procedure. This is a terrible price to pay mentally and physically by the woman and her partner. Bari's husband endured as well. Bari left me with this final thought.
I think it's important to share these stories, and I would encourage other people who have gone through this not to hide in the shadows anymore, and to really, activate their voice and make it not as it shouldn't be this taboo, because millions of women get abortions every year. It's a natural thing with healthcare, and regardless of your reason for it, it's healthcare. Abortion is healthcare.
Since 2016, U.S. military hospitals have performed 91 abortions. This doesn't include TRICARE, but they also have to follow the same rules. The views expressed in this episode are those of the individuals themselves. We're not political. We're not telling you what to believe or telling you what's right or wrong. This was about a seasoned woman reporter covering a story that affected her and millions of other women. This was a story about a woman who had to make one of the most heartbreaking decisions a person can make, and the hell she went through because of it. All of that through the lens of a guy who's never been in either of their shoes, has never had to deal with the burden of an unhealthy pregnancy, and has his own ideas of how we should address abortion in this country. We all have our own moral yardstick, but it shouldn't be a laminaria stick. Thank you for listening, and as always, be sure to check out Stars and Stripes online. Go to stripes.com today and get 50% off your digital subscription when you use promo code PODCAST. That's 50% off when you use promo code PODCAST. Don't forget to follow Military Matters on Twitter, StripesMMPod. You're going to follow me and Jack at RodPodRod and Jack Murphy RGR, respectively. Stars and Stripes is also on Facebook, so go give that a follow too. This episode was brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we'll see you at the next episode.